Hey, woman beings, and welcome to this episode of our podcast. I'm here with the amazing Kelly Ann and the amazing Emma, and we have a guest with us, Rheva Henry, who is just a girl who happens to be a worship leader. She's an adjunct professor who teaches voice and music and worship leading to young minds, and she's also full of wisdom. So we're very excited to pass along some of her deep wealth of knowledge to you today. And with all that being said, let's dive in. Welcome to the Woman Being Podcast community,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
and have the freedom to change our minds.
Without expectation or judgment,
we will hold a safe space and support each other
as we navigate together in the form of feminine.
Recently, you did this amazing Instagram story, 40 days before 40 situation. And you output some of your amazing ideas that you had learned over your life and little nuggets of wisdom. And so many of them were so good that I was like, we have to reach out to her and get her on this podcast because you're amazing. And the world should know.
Yeah. It's also unbelievable that you're 40, honestly.
Thank you, girl.
Tell us your skincare routine, please.
Yeah. She's not looking great right now, but you know.
She is. So
Yeah. 40 days to 40. 40 is a big birthday, right? Mm-hmm. So, and a lot of people that I went to high school with, the people you went to high school with, you start turning the same ages and it's like back to back. So people that were in the class before me were turning 40 last year during 2020. And I'm like, oh, that is so sad to have such like a big birthday during crazy times when you could barely do anything.
Yeah.
So I'm like, ooh, well, what am I going to do for my 40th birthday? And so I got this idea to talk about 40 lessons that I learned in my 30s. Wow. And the 30s, when I tell you, they taught me a lot. They taught me a lot from beginning to the end. And so I was like, literally, I feel like the 30s really made me. And so I was like, I want to share some of the things that I learned along the way about life, about relationships, about ministry life, just about so many different things that I learned in my 30s. And I'm thinking, maybe I'll share with people and we'll see if they get something out of it. But the response was like really, really crazy to me because it was such a wide gamut of people that actually resonated with the posts from literally like young. I say young because I am 40. So people that are like in their 20s, so people that were like in their like 60s and 70s, they were like, oh my goodness, like you should put this in a book. So I'm contemplating about how to compile the things.
Yes, she could write a book.
About the lessons of my life. So
yeah, and some of those things she talked about singleness. You talked about navigating painful ministry experiences. You talked about racial justice. And womanhood and all sorts of things. It was just incredible.
Yeah, a really wide gamut.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Which kind of messed with my head when people started talking about a book. I'm like, because you think of a book, you think of one topic. And so I'm like, well, how am I supposed to combine all of the different areas of lessons, if you will, into one book? But someone gave me a couple of ideas about how other authors have done, how they explore various topics. So I was like, okay, we'll have to explore this one a little bit, for sure.
Well, we eagerly await with anticipation the day that is released.
I love that. And also, like hearing from you almost gives a young mid-20s person hope, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like the lessons get to keep going. You don't have to figure it all out in your 20s, which I feel like there's a lot of pressure for. And I don't know about you ladies, Kelly and Emma, but 20s have kind of kicked my butt. But knowing that there's time and there's grace to continue the process. But particularly what I'm curious about is, as you've been a part of various church communities, you kind of addressed this in your post. What are some of the ways that you've seen churches do things well and not so well. It feels like you've kind of experienced a wide gamut.
A wide gamut and a lot of wide different environments as well. I want to say that the one thing that I feel that I've seen kind of across the board people do well is really help people identify, like, what are you gifted to do? You know, what is purpose? How do you find your purpose? What are you supposed to do in this lifetime, in this world? So really kind of being like a discovery zone type place for a lot of people. I think I've seen that done well across the board. And then, of course, there are environments where people have done some things well and other people have not. But one thing that I would say across the board, just kind of giving a general of something I've seen that has not gone well, is how to do family right. You know, how to really do community, how to really, and church is supposed to be the place of community, right? When I grew up, especially in African American churches, like the church was the family. Like I didn't know anything outside of Sister so-and-so was the auntie that could get you together if you were out of line, you know, because she had permission to, because it was one big family. And even just birthdays, like I still see today from like friendships that I had or my sister had from the church that we grew up in, like they're all still really good friends. And when they start posting pictures, especially my sister, because she was older than I was, she's still alive, so it's not like she wasn't alive anymore. She was older than I was. She's still older than me. You know, she still is. She's still alive and breathing. She's still kicking it. Okay, my bad. But like they are still such good friends. They have such great memories from trips and, you know, different things that they had together as kind of like a family unit. And so like when one of their family members dies or like one of their parents dies, it's like, oh, somebody from our actual blood family actually died. That's what it felt like, you know? And so, and a lot of that does come from kind of the historical racial kind of tension, if you will, in the world, because the church was kind of the gathering place. It was the safe place, you know, for the community to come and to be obviously with like-minded people, but to really kind of get their hearts healed. So you end up investing a lot, you know, in the church. So that's kind of just what I grew up under. That's what I grew up around. And then I grew up, right? I did. And and just realized there were some places that I've seen it done well. And there are other places where I've seen it like, oh my goodness. The idea of family, one, everybody thinks differently about what family actually is, you know. Absolutely. I think the best, probably most healing statement I ever heard was everybody has a different definition of family. So then it kind of gave me the idea like, oh, I can't put expectations on people because what they think family is and what I think family is are two completely different things. And then you bring that into a church and you have like hundreds of people with different ideas of what family really means. And so a lot of people are just acting out what they probably experienced from family, and then they bring it to church and they think that this, if I can wrap a nice little Christian bow around it, then this is right, this is good. And so I've seen across the board that churches, because of that, because there's not one single definition of what community and family actually is, then so many people bring their interpretations into the church, and it unfortunately causes a lot of the hurt and causes a lot of the pain.
That's like so interesting to me as well, because like we were talking with Megan Shantz recently about the difference between the ruler's church and the people's church. And I feel like we see a big we see a difference in that as well. When you're talking about like African American communities, the church was the safe haven. For like the typical white evangelical church, that's not necessarily the case. And so I feel like you can see very different manifestations, if you will, of the word family and interpretations. And it's not always amazing.
Right. And now, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Now, I will not paint the picture to say that every African American church got it right and they understood how to do it, because they don't. You know, and they still take kind of their same interpretation of what family is. If you grew up in a family where you were told what to do and you better respect your elders type lingo of life, then you kind of can take that into your leadership role, and you are expecting people to, oh no, I'm your elder, you respect me, and you kind of divvy out that kind of dictatorship type mentality to a lot of people. And on the receiving end, you don't know any difference, so you receive it and you say, okay, this is normal, because this is actually probably how I grew up too. So I have to sit here and take it. And it's like, actually, this is probably a real toxic relationship. And we don't really actually know it because we don't have language for it, because we don't talk about those types of things. So it's across the board. But at the general kind of core, I think just even of African American people in general, we have always been like a rallying people, you know. So you take us to church and we're rallying around our love for God and scripture and all those types of things, then it does become that safe haven. We love to eat together. We love to quote unquote fellowship. We literally always had a fellowship hall, because what do you do at the fellowship hall? You fellowship. It's all about breaking bread, right? Even if the bread was just cookies from the dollar store and the jug of juice after service. You went over there and you got your little cookies. And it was literally usually when I say dollar store cookies, it was literally like just the cookie, the Oreo light cookies, but not quite Oreos. You know what I'm saying? Little sandwich type cookies.
I do.
With your little high fructose syrup juice. And you were happy about it, and you went and you did it because that's what was normal, and it was the people. Now, it was a real great day if somebody had some fried chicken and some green beans and mashed potatoes. Like, oh, we got real food today. This is great. But I do believe, just generally across the board, the one thing that I've seen not done well is that community aspect and the family.
I think it's really interesting because I think we have seen the trend in like American culture, and then magnified even more, I think, in white American culture is to be so individualized and to not really rely on community. And I think there's some aspects where like white communities don't really feel the need for that, whereas like communities that are minorities, like there's more of that like camaraderie and like more of that fellowship because of like shared experiences and shared oppression and all the different things that go into that. And so we wind up with churches that are like predominantly white churches that look nothing like the Acts church, honestly, and that don't have that sense of community and that sense of family. Because it's all about us. It's all about the individual. And like, it's about what does church do for you and not about like, how can I become part of this body? You know? I think a lot of people see church as sort of like a self-service rather than a community to become part of and to sow into. Like, they're like, well, what does this give me? What is this feeding me? I think is the thing that a lot of people say. And it's like, well, like, that's not really the entire point, you know? And it's actually interesting you're talking about like the differences of family definitions and of like respect and things like that. It makes me think of I was living in Philadelphia and I was going to a church that was very diverse, and our pastor he's mixed of a bunch of different races, but he grew up in a mostly sort of like African American / Native American home, and there were a couple times where we actually sort of clashed because we had sort of different definitions of what respect looked like, and we had honest conversations about it, which was really valuable and really helpful. But it sort of hit me like, oh, we're not seeing eye to eye here because like we're coming from such different backgrounds, and like we need to sit down and talk about this, which like it was great. I adore my pastor from Philly, and it was really, really good that we communicated that, but a lot of people don't get that communication. Right. And I think that's really key when you're coming from all these different backgrounds. If you're a bunch of people coming together, we are the body of Christ and we have that commonality. but we still have our differences in the ways that we were raised, and we have our differences in our cultures and in the way that we view things and the way we think about things and what our personality is and all of that. And that's some of the tension that comes with family.
Well, that's family too at the same time, right? So like if we actually had that one definition of what does this look like in the church context, and it involved everybody being able to have a seat at the table, bringing 100% who they are to the table, and us embracing it, us talking about the differences, us, talking about the tense moments when there is a tense moment, because if we come from environments where like, no, you stuff it down, you don't talk about it, you don't do any of those types of things. Right, girl, me too, right? You don't have that as a tool.
Yeah.
You're coming in and you're just operating, like you're saying, like out of what you normally do versus everybody coming to that table. So I'm like, oh, can somebody just get like on a big, I don't know, speaker in every part of the country and say, hey, this is what family looks like. This is what you do when there's a disagreement. Like if you did that, and then people would come in, even though it may be uncomfortable to them, they could come in and say, okay, I have to learn something or I have to put down something in order to pick up something, but we don't know that. And so it's beautiful that you had the opportunity to be able to engage in that conversation with the pastor, who obviously has a high value for communication and which people don't, that's within itself. And like you said, not even knowing what respect looks like on all ends. Yeah. Like something as small as that. Yeah. People, you have no idea. Like I used to teach high school. Oh. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
That is
God bless you.
You are an angel.
At a private Christian school at that.
Oh no.
So it adds an extra layer, and I love the kids, but what it came down to was respect of what respect looks like to me. They're like, Miss Henry, you probably acted like us in high school. I said, no. No. Because my mom was crazy, and so she told me if I embarrassed her in public that she would embarrass me in public. And I didn't test her. I took her at her word, because I knew she was crazy.
You're like, she's serious.
1,000%. I said the issue is, and so there was kind of like a fear and respect at the same time. Yeah. But with her, I'm like, you guys don't fear your parents, And so I said, do you treat your mother like you treat me? And the answer was yes. And so different backgrounds, different ways of seeing respect, seeing leadership, seeing people that are older than them, or in any other case, the response is going to be different. So if it's different within a classroom, surely it's different within a church.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and I think something, I don't know if Kelly Ann's talked about this or if we talked about this with you, or I don't remember where this came up, but I think oftentimes people forget that even though it's family, you still need boundaries. Oh, yes. Like I think maybe there's an assumption that like, oh, this is family, this is safe. And we forget that it is mutual respect and like respecting each other's like needs and wants, etc. But a lot of it is like setting good boundaries. And, totally. I'm not going to be as close to, an estranged brother as I am like a close brother, or things like that. So the idea of like just letting all of our guards down and like coming together as a community, I think ideally, yes, that would be that would be like the, I don't know,
the goal,
the goal. But like we have to be realistic, we have to guard our heart, we have to step in and like teach people how to treat us with love in the way that we need, which has been a lifelong journey for me. But yeah, I think that like isn't often an element that is forgotten when it comes to the word family, is that there's, my parents don't live in my house, we don't have the same dynamics that everybody might think.
No, I think that's super important. I think teaching people the importance, one, of establishing boundaries, and then also teaching people how to love people with boundaries. Like those things are definitely not talked about, especially within a church, right? Going back to actual family, I have an aunt, like she had a drug problem, and it's a very known fact that she would steal things and go buy drugs, right? So if aunt comes over, which is a rare occasion that she does get a chance to come over, number one, so boundary number one. Number two, like, we hide things. Like, we're not going to give you as much access to the house as we would give cousin who's totally fine. You know? And so I think you do learn to put up boundaries. And it's not to, like, be cold-hearted and to be shut off and shut down to people and things. But you do learn, like, who can handle the responsibility of having access, that close access to your heart. And that comes from time. I think we did talk about that. That comes from trust. That does not come in day one. You know, and the people that think that, oh, you met me today and now you're going to hear all my life's long stories. And no, that's not happening, baby. So, like, it's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take time for me to get to know you. It's going to take time for me to get to see if this is a trusted place. And if I do see that it's probably not, it's not that I love you less. It's just that I don't give you access to my heart. And that's okay. And I'm not any less Christian for not doing so.
Oh,
Absolutely.
and I love what you just said. I'm not any less Christian because I didn't give you full access to my heart. How many people need to hear that?
Could say that one again.
Yeah.
You know? Like,
I think,
Reach.
there's a lot of push within church communities to be just like hyper vulnerable all the time. And I think that there's this tension between like transparency about your life and vulnerability about your life. Like whether sure, you can be transparent and sort of share about the things that have happened to you, share about your past or whatever, but vulnerability is something that's sort of another level of actually like partnering with people through the things that you're going through and through your life struggles and whatever that looks like. And like not everybody just gets that access.
Right. Well, and I think it, like, out of an attempt, because I think I can at least speak into the white evangelical church, out of an attempt to want that family and to want that closeness, we've kind of created a culture where we sit down at somebody's house and have dinner, and then everybody shares their deepest, darkest secrets. And this is like, you know, an 8-week Bible study that you get put into random homes because this is how you do community and you get to know new people and stuff. And suddenly you're like bearing your heart to people that, number one, you don't even know that well. Number two, like, have no trust or rapport built up with. And it's sort of like these forced vulnerability sessions. And we don't, it's, I don't know. It feels like out of an attempt to create that community, we've sort of set up artificial structures that require vulnerability. But vulnerability without connection is actually not family.
Yep. So can I just share an unpopular church opinion?
Yes, please
Do it.
It is that I hate small groups. And it's not that I don't love the idea of them. It's literally what you just said, Kelly, of we're going to pick these random people, make them have this vulnerability, connection, family situation for whatever, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then it's done. And like it kind of makes me think of Simon, I can't remember his last name, but
Sinek?
Thank you, yes. And he has this like little talk about how trust is built. And it's in the little moments over time. No one can tell you when trust happens, but it's about history. Absolutely. And I'm like, this idea of like, we're just going to get together and it's going to be great. And all this growth is going to happen and this spiritual vulnerability. And I'm like,
these are going to be your lifelong friends.
I don't know that that's how it works.
Yeah.
And I love the intention. I think the intention's beautiful, but I'm just like, ooh, I don't function like that as a human.
Yeah, I feel like I'd say I hate short-term small groups. I adore long-term small groups.
Yeah.
And that's been more of what I've experienced in churches is like small groups where you're literally going to be going there for years. And it's not like a 6-week Bible study that we're going to go through this devotional and
but even like a 6th month, honestly, like if like hopping into a 6th month Bible study with randos, like that's not... Trust is built.
I mean, I think it depends on the person too.
It does. I think that's fair. But like I've I think that's amazing that you've had that experience with like long-term small groups. I've never seen that done personally, but also you kind of, it feels like your church is kind of like the cream of the crop.
Yeah,
I went to some great churches.
You have some really
The rest
good
of us are like-
experiences. I'm just like,
I was just very blessed.
I think even what it sounds like, even from like what your church might have been like, that they placed a high value on discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
Discipleship and small groups are not the same thing.
Yes, thank you.
You know, and so small groups, it's just like you were saying, it's a beautiful idea of getting people to come together, and it's like a seed. Like, let's just throw this seed out there, and maybe these people will gel, maybe they won't, but if they do, maybe they will eventually become a long-term group, you know, type situation. So it's hopeful, and its intentions are beautiful and wonderful and great. But when a church is like committed to life-on-life discipleship, that's the game changer, because then it is literally you becoming friends or whatever with this group of people. I experienced that with my church back in Texas. We were all a part of a college ministry together. So we were in this thing together. So we got to know each other. It wasn't just like, oh, let's put you in a room and get together for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
We're working together. We're doing all the things. It's like, oh, okay, you're kind of cool. You want to hang out and go to like the movies afterwards? Okay, cool. You want to just come to my house for a game night? Sure, cool. And so it was super organic, but we were all growing and learning at the same time. Not in a Bible study per se, but it was just an organic growth of friendship. Because of that organic growth of friendship, and we had a leader who was over the college ministry who didn't necessarily encourage us to all get together, but opened up his life for us to be a part of. And so it was literally like, hey, y'all want to come over? Let's have the team over for, you know, dinner at the house with the kids. Just dinner, no agenda, dinner and hanging.
That's beautiful.
So because of that life on life
Yeah.
type of interaction, it was like, oh, and now those are literally some of my closest friends still to this day, almost 20 years later.
Yeah.
That is amazing because it just takes so much of the pressure off of it.
The last time I had a good small group was in high school, because there was a group of like young, just out of high school, like early college students, and then some high school students, and they like got together, and we just had fun together, and like it was the kind of small group where you would go and you knew it was supposed to be 3 hours. And you'd stay 6 or 8 hours because everybody's having a good time. Or you'd show up like 2 hours early just to like be together.
Yep.
I haven't like found that again because it really feels like, I mean, it's the same as like developing an organic Instagram account compared to like paying for promotion. You know, like you can get follows, you can grow an audience, but if your audience doesn't engage with you, it's not actually beneficial to anybody. So like this idea of like this organic growth in groups, I feel like it's not like necessarily, there's not a step-by-step in the Bible on how to do that, or that it has to be that way or whatever. But I really feel like, at least in my life, like I want to commune and talk about Jesus and do the Bible with the people that are already like my people, like the hard part is when it comes in and it's like, oh, there's new people and we got to mix it up and we got everybody, it's like, maybe we don't, like maybe, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having like, meet and greets and helping people get to know more people. But like when you take that meet and greet and then you put it into an 8-month program or a 6-week program or whatever, like it becomes this awkward, like forced thing, and these people may not have no chemistry at all. But I understand that sometimes people really click and it works, and it's sort of like dating, or online dating.
It's like rolling the dice. It's like, take a chance, but it may not work. You may never talk to these people ever again, but I mean, you did it for 6 weeks, so try again next time. But then who wants to try again next time? And even for like the people that are just not social butterflies, throwing them into a group full of strangers is probably not the most appealing process.
It's very intimidating.
1000% versus if I were to see this person and I were to approach this person and like, hey, you new here, blah, 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 and start to just kind of have casual conversation. You want to get coffee one day. And then maybe we get coffee one day, even though I don't drink coffee, so I probably have tea. But you get tea one day and they drink coffee. And, and it's cool. Like, all right, cool. Well, hey, I'm actually having like a game night at my house with some friends. You can come if you'd like. And making it feel less pressure like what you were saying, and making it just doing life with people. I feel like that aspect would help out this whole small group scenario from being so traumatic and so weird, and then we all get a chance to flourish.
Totally. Well, I feel like we've all had that experience where we're in a group and we feel pressured to share something, and so we like share a prayer request or something that with people we don't know, and then 3 weeks later we find out that one person in the group or those couples in the group are actually literal crazies.
Right.
And you wish that you never, why did I connect with these people ever,
Or you get a really traumatizing response from people.
Yeah.
I remember one time I was like, I am just so hungry for more of God. And I was telling them I was like, I need more. I feel like I'm starving. And they were just like, oh, that's an amazing place to be. And that was the response. Yeah, just keep that going. And I'm like, no, I don't think you understand what I'm describing. I am describing a desperation for more of the Lord. And your response is, that's great. And I was like, and we don't always know how to handle each other's vulnerabilities. Totally. And that's why, again, back to Simon, those trust moments that are just built over time.
Over time. It takes time. I think we talked about this. But a friend of mine, he's not really a friend. I actually don't really know him. So there we go. Backtrack on that. A person I know. There we go. A human. Basically said how you build trust. If you were to fill a bucket with trust, it takes one drop at a time until that bucket is filled. And it takes 1 second for that entire bucket to be spilled over. And rebuilding that process. So it does take time. I think bringing the trust factor into the conversation is so important, because I think it's kind of dumb, if you would, to say, hey, strangers get in a room and all of a sudden become best friends. I don't think that sets people up with safety. I don't think it sets people up to really be the best version of themselves in that moment, versus practicing, hey, some trust. What would it look like if churches practiced building trust with each other in the groups within their churches, and encourage that and to move forward in that? You might see something a lot different, and you might see those authentic relationships that could last for a lifetime, even if the people did move away.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, as we're talking about this and things that the church could do better, I think that there's so much to dive into with vulnerability and family and what all that looks like. But one thing that you touched on a little bit earlier that I'd love to hear a little bit more about is what the church could do better in terms of race, right? So in the past year, we've had a really big sort of racial reckoning in this country. I think of a lot of people realizing things that have been going on for a long time that people have sort of turned a blind eye to. And the church has had varied responses to that. So I'm curious to hear from you, what are some of the ways you could see the church do better in that area?
Ooh, first of all, 2020, everybody was saying that it's the year of vision.
2020 vision.
2020 vision.
So
and, it was beyond. I'm like, however, the things that we saw were not things that we were prepared to see, right? And I'm like, sure, it just makes all the sense that the world would slow down, that everyone was at home and everyone was actually forced to watch. And everybody was actually forced to open their eyes to see in that moment.
Less distractions.
No busyness to run to the next thing. Like, everyone had to watch it. And which was great on one end, but just like you were saying, the responses varied. Everybody did not respond with compassion and with like, we must do something about this. And I get it when you go into the political realm of life, but how opinions always vary, especially when, things are political. But I think the first thing the church can do on race conversation is take politics out of it and go back and just actually look at humanity. And it's not about what bills, policies, all the things, throw that out the window and look at humanity. Look at your fellow brothers, your fellow sisters. Look, going back to this family aspect of it, your brothers are hurting, your sisters are hurting, your people, your family members are being mistreated. I think when you take the political lens off and you actually see a human and you actually see a person and you look in eyes and you hear stories, it allows you to feel something that you've never felt before. And that's the kind of the turning point that I've seen in a lot of churches and church leaders, is that they actually saw people this time. They didn't see a political agenda. They didn't see political that was about to be a really not great word.
I was like here for it. I was ready. Like, say it.
Yes, just go for it. Okay. Political stances, we'll just completely flip it. Political stances on a lot of things. And they actually saw people. And they saw people's stories. They heard people's stories. And they saw people in their churches. And they actually saw how it affected them and their own personal stories. And so the positive things that have come from it was that the church actually started to see people. And in order for us to continue to move forward with the race conversation, we have to be willing to see each other. We have to be willing to hear each other. But that's on all sides. And so it's not just on the sides of the people that are oppressed. I really believe we all need to listen to each other, because the people that are not oppressed need to hear that, hey, when you do this thing and when you say this thing and when you champion this thing, this is actually how it makes this group of people feel. Okay? And then we need to know, why do you feel this way? Why are you so passionate about this thing? Why do you care about these particular areas? Because let me tell you, over here, that's not even on our radar. And you, for example, because it still takes it back to politics, but you care about taxes, and these people over here care about their loved ones being killed. Two very different narratives, two very different stories. But if we all gathered once again at a table to actually dialogue, and I care about you as my sister, I care about you as my brother, and I'm willing to look you in the eye and hear your story and hear and actually care about your story, it may cause me to look differently at what I'm thinking about. And then maybe you can teach me about taxes, because literally it's literally a thing.
Here's the thing,
because taxes are not on my radar of things to actually care about, because I'm trying to stay alive. So while you harp on taxes, I'm like, that sounds real dumb to me. But however, I know it affects our livelihood in some way. So maybe you talk to me about what this is, and I can talk to you about this, and maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle. So I think churches being able to hear each other's stories and share why you have this belief about this thing would make me not think that you're completely insensitive and you don't have a heart when you're talking about taxes. Versus maybe you actually do care about me, but I don't know that you care about me because of the thing that you harp on.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Gosh, there's so much I could talk about with this. I feel like, but I think that that's one of the biggest flaws with our current political system is that we have this like two-party thing where it's like you are either on this party or you're on this party, and you must align with all the things that each of these parties believes in. So, for example, if you're more conservative and you're on the Republican side, and I know people who are much more conservative because of taxes. They're like, I'm an economics person, I'm into this, and I think that this is the way taxes should be done, or I think this is how involved the government should be in these things. But for some reason, we've decided that if you think that, then you also must think these things about race. You also must think these things about immigration. You also must think these things about the unborn,
women's rights,
about women's rights, all sorts of things. And then on the flip side too, for example, in the Democratic Party, you might care about like all these different social justice issues. But there's not room for you to also be like pro-life as a Democrat, and which is also a social justice issue. So it's like there's so much where they say this is black and white, and I think that there's some people that are pushing for that gray and that are pushing for less of that two-party, but it's so hard, and I think that we get wrapped up in that, and then we say, well, like, if you believe in this, then you're a communist, or if you believe in this, then you are not a Christian, you know? And so it's so important to sit down and actually think, like, if we strip all these different things away and we look at the people, I think there's so much more room for compassion, and there's so much more room to actually connect and care about these people. It actually makes me think of... This is kind of an out there example, but it's a scene from the movie The Promising Young Woman.
I was going to bring up The Promising Young Woman.
I got it. So I think this episode will already be out by the time this episode comes out. So we have an episode that is already out, I believe, about The Promising Young Woman.
Go watch it.
It's an Oscar-nominated movie that's came out in December.
Directed by a female.
Directed by a woman. And anyways, it's about sexual assault. It's not about race at all, really. But it has this one woman in it who basically is victim blaming. And she is talking about how, like, this girl got sexually assaulted, and she's like, well, she probably shouldn't have been so drunk. She probably shouldn't have put herself in this situation. Oh, it was probably for attention, things like that. And then she has an instance in the movie where this same woman thinks she might have just gotten sexually assaulted.
Yes.
And she freaks out because she feels so violated, and she doesn't know what happened because she was so drunk.
Yep.
And it's this whole mind game. It's a very fascinating movie. But she then has so much more compassion for that situation and winds up like giving evidence that helps towards the case of this other girl who was sexually assaulted, and she winds up having this sort of like change of heart, but because she experienced it. And I think that so often we detach ourselves from situations like race, women's rights, sexual assault, immigrate, all the things. We detach ourselves from it, and we turn these people into just like numbers or just like distant sort of like stories that we don't actually connect with, and then we can be so harsh and impartial and impersonal towards them. Whereas if we sat at the table and talked to someone who has experienced racism, if we sit at the table and talk to someone and really listen to them who's been a victim of sexual assault, of oppression, of whatever, and opened our hearts and our ears to them, there's just so much that could be done better, you know? And you feel that actual connection to people. That's what's gonna bring change that's bipartisan. That's what's gonna bring change that doesn't matter what party you are, because you're caring about people and their hearts.
Right. If you could all just remember that we actually are supposed to be on the same team. You know, and it's not red, blue, whatever, elephant, donkey, you know. It's like we're supposed to all gather around this lamb. And when we gather around this lamb, there are a lot of commonalities that we actually have that we don't really fully realize that we actually have. And I think what you were saying, even with the stories, sometimes like my biggest fear is for people that are so detached now. Like, I actually don't want you to have to experience something so up close to where you now get it.
Yeah.
But for some people, I'm like, that may be the only way that you get it, you know, because something has to happen to someone that is very, very close to you where the story becomes real. You know, and it does feel at this point like it's so far away, it's so far removed. But it's like, actually, you don't even realize sometimes it's like right in your backyard.
Yeah.
And you have no idea because you just live in your bubble.
Yep.
You know, and you live in your world. But there are people that are very actually close to you, closer than you actually think, that have experienced these things, but you wouldn't know because you're not at the table.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think for churches, if it started in the church, that could be like a huge ripple effect.
Yeah.
And if you think of all the many churches that are over in the entire country, if this type of conversation, these types of things started to happen within each individual church, what that would look like and how that would ripple throughout our entire country. Like, I am a firm believer that nobody wants to come to church because we are a hot mess right now, right? And it's not attractive, especially in 2020. Whoa, like, who wants to be a part of those people, right?
Yeah.
You know, and then we're looking at the world and we're like, oh, the world is going mad. I'm like, the world is doing what the world is supposed to do. They are living up to their job. They are fulfilling their mission. Like, we shouldn't be surprised. What we should be surprised about is how we're handling ourselves and what we're doing and how we're not shining. Like, our light is not shining like a city on a hill, you know? And so, but it could shine.
Yeah.
It has so much potential to, and because that is what it is designed to do. And so you hold really firmly to, like, okay, I believe that Jesus is coming back for this beautiful bride without a spot and without a wrinkle. So I know she's going to become glorious, and she's not ugly right now. Okay. Completely. She's not like a disheveled mess completely right now. She has beautiful
There's
parts
still
to her.
opportunity for redemption.
Oh, absolutely. It's a hot mess, but she has a story of redemption waiting for her. It's just that redeeming love story that he's going to come back for his beautiful bride. And she's going to be gorgeous. She's going to be spotless. But there's space to improve for sure.
Well, and that's the beauty of the gospel. We can bring it back to is like, we are such a broken hot mess, but because of that, it's God's work and by God's work only that, like, the church can accomplish anything. The church can be beautiful. The church can, you know, spread light and love. You know, I think these last few months have been so revealing to our total state of disrepair that it's like only God, honestly, only God.
It's like that. I'm so late to life, so I just started watching The Chosen.
Oh, I still haven't gotten there yet.
same.
So yeah,
I've watched it.
I'm only even 2 episodes in.
No shame. Anyway,
But one thing that this guy said in the first episode is like, it has to be God himself. So when you just said that right now, it's like, it's not human hands or human function that's going to be able to redeem the church. It's going to be God himself. He's the only one that's going to be able to purify and make her beautiful again. And like I said, she's not completely ugly, so don't get me wrong. She just has some spots that needs to be worked out, you know? and it's like you were saying, that realization that we are in desperate need of a savior. And it's not saying, oh, I am all put together every single day, even for the church to even say, oh, we are right, we have nothing wrong, we've never done anything wrong. Like, no, boo-boo, you got some issues and you do things and you make mistakes, but being able to recognize them, admit them. If the church admitted their mistakes, repented meaning to turn away from, and ask for forgiveness for some things that they've done and said. Do you know how healing, one, it would be to the church, but how healing it would be to humanity?
Yeah. I mean, if my people will turn away from their wicked ways and follow me, you know, like it's the story of the Bible. Like God's people needing to repent, and like in that repentance, God brings the healing,
absolutely,
and the victory and all of the things. But you know, we're not going to get there like with our self-righteous.
Oh, girl,
you know,
you got to pull that self-righteous stick right on out.
Oh my gosh,
of your two cheeks. Like literally, you got to pull it out, because like it's just. No. Calm down. Your stuff stinks and it's okay. We all use poopery. Like, let's just be honest about it and be real. And I think that is what, especially when you deal with like younger people, from like teenagers to early 20s and things of that nature, they're walking away because they don't sense the realness of it and the authenticity of it. And so when people actually start getting real, and they actually start saying, hey, I'm not perfect, we're not perfect, it's not perfect, but we're working on it. You know, people can identify with that. You're like, okay, well, I'm not perfect, and I'm working on it too, so y'all might be my people. You know, when people do that and become real, oh my goodness, you might actually see some people come home.
That's good. But I also feel like that is a lot of why we started this podcast, because we're young women trying to navigate life, navigate the gray. That is hard enough. We also, all three happen to be women of faith. And we actually needed space to talk about what isn't going well and what has negatively affected us, and create that room for that feedback and that process. And that doesn't mean that we aren't Christians, or that we don't love Jesus, or that, you know, we don't love the church. I deeply love the church. And it's because I deeply love the church that I'm willing to sit here and say, y'all need to look at this stuff. Like, this is where I'm hurting. This is where you have hurt other people, and where we need to grow and be better, because we're actually called to a higher standard. And that's okay. Just because it's feedback doesn't mean it's an assault against God's church.
Well, and honestly, if you're in the church right now, you should be repulsed. Like, it should be, you mentioned like being hard for people to go to church right now. It should be hard for you to go to church right now, because like
it's cringy.
It's cringy. It's a real mess. We've all experienced pain in our own ways, but if you're either A, pretending that everything's fine when it's not, or B, haven't experienced it and aren't listening to the stories of people who have, like, you're missing out on like the need that we have, and you're actually blocking progress and not like furthering it.
You are in a bubble.
Yes.
You're fully in a bubble, and you need to open your eyes and look around. And it's like that, dear Lord, like, just remove the scales from my eyes so that I can see rightly. I remember, I think it was my second year of ministry school, so 7 years ago now, that I just heard this like word in my heart that I was like, oh God, just give me proper perspective. Like, whatever it costs, give me proper perspective of everything around me. Of course, that is going to be a journey and a process, and it's hard and it hurts. But you have to face a lot of pain. But now it's like, oh, I can actually address the issues now that I see it. I'm not in the dark.
Seeing it is the big deal. It's the big part of it. It's not realizing. A lot of people just don't realize they have blind spots. You know, and even with the race situation particularly, like, your worldview, your own personal worldview has shaped the way that you see the world. It's the lens that you specifically see the world through, just because of your upbringing, your surroundings. And so, not to say like, oh my gosh, everybody's racist. Like, I won't put that label on people. Like, I won't. But I will say, a lot of people are very ignorant. Just because of their worldview. They have a very limited worldview, so they absolutely do not know. And then sometimes we willingly stay in our bubbles because our bubbles are safe.
It's
you
so
know,
safe.
but it's a scary prayer to pray, what you just said.
So scary.
To say, you know, the perspective. I want to have the correct perspective about all these things. And if we y'all know y'all prayed this prayer back in the day when you were like a teenager because somebody told you to, Lord, break my heart for what breaks yours.
Oh gosh.
And you grew up saying that, and and as you were kind of coming to your own faith, like for myself, I was kind of my own faith. I'm like, no, I want my heart to break for what breaks his heart. And there are many days that I've just sat and cried, just simply because of how his kids are going at each other.
Yeah.
Over the things, whether it's politics, whether it's the race issue, whether we should say Black Lives Matter in church or not because of what the actual organization stands for. And like I'm like, well, you're missing the point though, And so like all lives do matter 1000%, but they're suffering right now.
But
so we're talking about them right now.
Yeah.
But even just that entire dialogue and with other things within the church specifically, I'm like, my heart would just break that his kids would, one, talk to each other like that.
Yeah.
Number two, that his kids would completely miss the overall arching view of what's actually happening.
Yeah.
I'm like, is anybody sitting with Jesus and asking him what he thinks about this?
Yeah.
Because he has the right perspective. So if we ask him for his perspective, we might actually see things a little differently.
Yeah.
A whole lot differently, honestly.
Yeah.
And we would respond differently. And so I feel like that's a big part of us missing it in the church as well, of not coming to Jesus and asking him what is his perspective, what's his view on it, and instead of taking in our own views and our own thoughts of how it should be looked at, worked out, and walked through.
Yeah,
That's good.
But I think the good news is that, like, in that state of brokenness, like, repentance is the place where we can start.
Absolutely.
And in that, like, God promises to bring the healing and the future and, like, the victory that we all want. But yeah, it's first you have to let yourself be humbled, which is never a fun experience. And so it's hard.
And take it in. Sometimes you gotta just like sit and like absorb what is happening and let yourself process it and sit with Jesus and get that proper perspective and be like, okay, clearly I have some stuff to adjust in me.
Yeah.
Like if I'm having a vile reaction, it says something about me. It's not about this that's going on.
Yeah. No, that's really good.
So shifting gears a little bit here, but kind of along the same lines is this idea of deconstruction. And it's become a taboo word in our culture today. Usually it's that people associate deconstruction with leaving the faith and becoming an atheist. So that is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about deconstruction in terms of like breaking down some of those things that you just grew up believing or understanding and kind of going to the root of faith as its purest truth. But we've all kind of been in the church. We've all experienced pain and hurt. And I think for me, a lot of that was rooted in the belief that the church had my best interest at heart and that the church was a safe place to be. And so with that, I had a lot of guards down and a lot of things happened. So I was curious, you talked about this in your 40 days, was it 40 days to 40 or 40
days to 40?
40 days to 40 about like navigating ministry hurt, and you've been in ministry like your whole life. So how have you processed that and reconciled with that as a strong, beautiful worship leader now?
Ooh, I'm a PK, so that's a pastor's kid for those who don't know. So I literally have grown up in church my whole life. My mom literally went into labor at church. So I literally, I'm almost born on the pew. People say that, but I literally was almost born on it. So been in church my whole life, and my dad was a new Christian right before I was born. I think he may have been 1977-ish, 78-ish, and then I was born in 81. So do the math.
4 years?
There we go. Almost. Yeah, 4-ish years. And So a new Christian, never heard the gospel before ever in life, and he just went in full throttle. And so I grew up in a home where my dad was, everything was church. Church was life. Church was everything. Nothing else mattered but church. We will do church all day, every day, 5 days a week. Church. I literally became a cheerleader in high school to not go to church on Friday nights anymore. Like, I just got to get out of here. I got to get out.
Yep.
You know, so I've seen a lot, to say the least. But I was able to actually have a dad who I've seen navigate a lot of those things, which actually kind of is really crazy, because he passed away when I turned 30. So this hindsight is like, I said something at his funeral. I was like, it was like he had led me and walked me up until the point that he was supposed to, and now the training wheels were coming off and it was my turn to do this on my own. Now actually sitting here in this moment thinking about that, like, oh, that's how I navigated those 10 years of being 30, from 30 to 40 in that moment, because what I saw him literally deal with. And he dealt with the crazy leadership that he only really knew as a dad, because he didn't have a dad. He didn't even know what a family looked like, a unit looked like. So he had this spiritual figure that was now his spiritual dad, who didn't treat him the greatest, but still always wanted him around. So it was a very weird relationship, and he kind of would expect him to do things, unfortunately, but his focus was always on, my dedication and my commitment is to the Lord and it's not to people. And so I saw that navigated and lived out in my home on a consistent basis, even if he was fussing and cussing about what they have done. And even literally, you know, can I say this? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
100%. This is an explicit podcast. Literally, all the words.
Literally, one of my things my uncle told me about him one day when he was mad at something that probably I think his spiritual dad had done. He was pacing back and forth in a parking lot, and he was like, F this, it's about Christ, it ain't about them, F this, it's about Christ. I said, that's my daddy, you know? So having that kind of mentality of, ooh, people are crazy, and they will be crazy, and I actually kind of expect them to be crazy, you know? But I had to learn to lean into that place of pain, sitting with it, not brushing over it. And I brought it to the Lord. And I'm like, hey, this hurts, this sucks, and your people suck. Like, your kids, they suck right now. And I don't want to be here anymore, and I want to walk away. And one thing that he told me one day that I had to write on my board in my office was to learn to embrace the king and ignore the fool. And I was like, what? And he's like, embrace the king and ignore the fool, because, and it was from the story of Nabal and Abigail. And like, he was a king, but he was being a fool. And so learning to ignore the foolish things that they did and speak to that king inside of them and speak to who they actually were supposed to be. I had to learn to heal without getting an apology, because as much as we feel like we are owed an apology, and we are probably absolutely true, it's true that we are owed an apology for what we have experienced, the reality that we may not actually get one is real, because that takes someone, you know, reckoning with themselves what has happened, and that they did something wrong, and we don't admit that we've done something wrong, which is why we won't get an apology a lot of times. So I had to learn how to heal without getting an apology. I had to learn how to allow Holy Spirit to literally, how to cast my burdens, to cast my cares at Jesus' feet and allow him to heal me without human form actually ever coming in to heal that place. Because if I waited on human form, I probably would not be in a church to this day. But going back to my dad's mantra, like, it's about Jesus. And so I'm like, no, you did too much for me to walk away for their stupidity and their foolishness. So help me help myself, because they're crazy. And I don't want to deal with the crazy people anymore. But I had to learn just to even process my own pain. Like, I had to learn how to counsel myself. And it's so weird, you say Holy Spirit's a counselor, and like, so between me and Holy Spirit together, like, walked myself through, okay, what's the root? Why did this hurt you so bad? Like, what is the trigger? Okay, well, what do we need to deal with within ourselves, in order to heal past this moment and to not take this into this future situation, relationship, or whatever else? Okay, maybe you need to sit down for a little bit. Maybe you need to take a break, and just take some time and heal. Now I know I like water. I didn't know I liked water back then. So I have to at least go look at water to find my peaceful place. So I had to learn a lot about Rheva in that process of navigating the pain and navigating the church hurt, and then learning how to put up boundaries. My mom used to always tell me, you make friends too fast and everybody is not your friend. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm Rheva. Everybody wants to be my friend. What are you talking about?
Obviously.
No one would ever want to hurt me because I'm so amazing. I don't understand what you're talking about. It's always a party over here. And then I realized that wasn't true. And there are people that don't like you simply just because they don't like you. Those are some of the 40-day lessons that I was sharing. It's like, hey, you're not always going to be somebody's cup of tea. You're not always going to people are not always going to expect the best out of you, or believe the best about you. And I'm like, that was hard for me because I'm a 2 in the Enneagram, and I don't understand you not believing the best about me and not wanting me to be your best friend. So when that is the case and people do vindictive things and they try to set you up to fail, that was new to me. So I was 26, 27 at the time. Like, literally, like, people are setting me up to fail. And I'm like, wow. But there was this, I have to attribute to Holy Spirit, because there was like this Holy Spirit resilience that came up inside me as a 25-year-old. Nobody coached me. Nobody taught me how to do this. I have to say it was Holy Spirit. That it was this thing that came up inside of me that said, oh, no, you will never see me fail. I will always bounce back on my feet. It is not going to happen. I'm not falling here. So I don't care if you tried to do something, like, okay, Holy Spirit, what are we doing? And like, he would navigate me through the situation and I wouldn't fail. And so in that moment, it kind of gives you this confidence. It gives you this reassurance that regardless as to what people may throw at you and how they may come at you, even within the church, that you got a secret power, this secret force that is helping you navigate and will help you not to fall every single time. And so I've leaned into that place and just relied on that place throughout those years. And yeah, I was able to use my dad's example a lot as well. But now knowing, that's how I navigated it.
Wow. That's incredible. Like, to have that figure in your life. And he probably, learned the hardest lessons on your behalf, and you were able to kind of take all of the tools that he had taught you into. I mean, that's amazing. The beautiful legacy of parents and our ancestors.
The beautiful legacy of church hurt. That's hilarious. But I think it's just, even when you were learning lessons, you didn't realize you were learning. Because I couldn't, until we actually talked, did I realize, like, oh, I learned it from my dad.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize it.
Yeah. And I think that that's really beautiful, too, that you were walking in sort of recognizing that the church was flawed and being okay with recognizing that. Because I think sort of like Kelly touched on with like the idea of deconstruction or of doubt or feeling sort of betrayed by the church or hurt by the church, like those things can feel really scary. And I think that people a lot of times sort of like seize up at those words because it's like, oh, well, you're gonna leave then.
Yeah.
You're gonna leave the church. You're gonna leave Jesus. And it's like, no, actually, like, I would argue that a relationship with Jesus is a lot stronger than those things.
Yes.
And that it can withstand those things. And that people are flawed, and we have to recognize that and recognize that they're actually not our Christ.
Yeah.
They are not our religion. They are not what we put our faith in.
Yeah.
They are just people who are also trying to figure out how to do things in a way that honors God, and some of them aren't trying to figure out how to do things in a way that honors God. But I think that's where people get hung up a lot of times, is that equating the body of Christ with Christ. But that's just not the case, because if it were, then we would be like Peter chopping off people's ears, and we would be like what is it, Ananias and Sapphira, like giving false donation amounts to the church, and like all these things of people of faith that we see that are messing up. That's part of the Bible and part of our story that we get to share in as Christians, because we are not the Christ.
But even that, though, it's like the Bible is full of flawed people.
Yeah.
When did we find the narrative that we had to be perfect?
No. What makes us think, based off of the Bible, that the church should be full of a bunch of perfect people? There's absolutely no impression of that.
And like, I feel like it was very strategic as to why he left all the flawed parts in there, because it's like, hey, this is a beautiful story of redemption. It is a beautiful story of grace. It is a beautiful story of flawed people being restored. Like, so if we expect the church to be perfect right now, like, it's not going to be, because look at history, look at the Bible. We do know how it ends, but the journey to get there, it's a bumpy one.
Yeah.
It's a bumpy one.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, and as I've been processing things more, I mean, I really sort of like washed up on the shores of Redding, California, like kind of an empty shell after being on the missions field. And over time, like, had to kind of let go of my need to appear a particular way or perform a particular way in the church in order to feel like I was close to God, or that I was being a good Christian, or, you know, whatever that even means. And I think what it has required me to do is really press in to Jesus and to trust that, like, in my incapacity, he is making me stronger, and he is, like, using me more for his glory than I could do on my own. So I think, like, a lot of that pain created a way for me to understand, like, the power of God in my weakness, truly. So I'm still, you know, working through all of that. But I think, like, this idea of embracing the king, neglecting the fool, or ignoring the fool, and remembering, like, people are crazy.
Literally.
And having that expectation, and not, like, to be guarded or to be, like, closed off or whatever,
Not
but
like
because
used to let nobody in and to isolate.
but because, like,
Wisdom.
it's like, it's life. It's becoming more accustomed to life, maybe. I don't know, but we'll see how I feel at 40.
Hey.
I can't wait. Honestly, I'm like, I can't wait to be 30, and I can't wait to be 40. It's going to be amazing. I'm just, like, ready to gain all the wisdom so that I can start to feel like I have more and more tools. So I have to ask.
Yes.
Now that you are 40 and looking back, what is one thing that you would tell your 20-something-year-old self for the 20-somethings in the room?
I would say it's important to heal. I think I alluded to it earlier about walking through that healing process and not taking that into the next situation or the next relationship or the next whatever. I've learned that if I do that, then I'm walking in already with my lens, you know, for that particular situation. And the people are already set up to fail because I already have a strike against them because of what has happened to me in the past. So walking into situations healed, go to counseling. You know, or if you don't have a counselor, can't afford a counselor, find a super trusted friend that you can process and walk through, you know, some of the healing processes with, to kind of get to the root of what those issues are. I'm a big get to the root person. Get to the root. I'm like, don't deal with the symptoms, get to the root.
Yeah.
Because that's where the real healing and the real transformation is going to take place, by getting that root, uprooting it and getting it out. And then being able to heal that place where that root has lived for so long. So if I were to tell my 20-something old self, I'm like, girl, get some counseling, get some healing. Don't carry that baggage into the next season, because one, you want to fully show up in the next season, and two, you want to actually receive all that you're supposed to receive from that place and that relationship in the next season, and you won't be able to do it if you're coming in wounded.
That's good.
That's
a word right there.
Whew. We can like cut that out and like put it to like relaxing music.
Yeah.
And like
spa music.
fall asleep to this every night.
Until you really believe it.
You really believe it.
Healed. I'm healed. No, I love that though, and I can fully get behind that. I love my therapist. I don't know where I would be without her. And especially having people in your life, these two amazing ladies, my fabulous husband, to help support that healing process is vital.
So beautiful and so needed. And especially come, like we were saying earlier, from families that didn't talk about things and they didn't process emotions and all of that. It can be very foreign to you, you know, to be able to talk about the things, talk about the pain, talk about the hurt, talk about the disappointments. But you don't realize how much you need it until you actually do it.
Yeah.
So.
That's a good word. I so admire you and all of your wisdom and strength and what you've brought to this discussion and just the world in general. I was curious, as a woman, as a woman of faith and an educator and a leader, what does the phrase woman being mean to you?
Ooh,
It's the one.
it's the one. You know, literally, I really think of just fierce, go-getter, you can't tell me what I can't do type person, the woman being. You know, I literally, it's like no boundaries, no limits, no limitations to her, to the things that she accomplishes, the things that she puts her hands to, because her hands are on it, is going to completely blossom and flourish, because if anybody else's hands were on it, it would not do the same, because a certain level of magic that she has that whatever she touches, it just becomes way more than a man, being would have thought that it would have become, because we just have a special flair to us that they don't, but we do need them and we love them, but that's who she is, and everything she touches just flourishes.
It's good. I love that. Thank you so much. And as we're coming to a close, we love to plug away at you and what you're doing. And so where can people find you? How can they know more? And also, like, what are some resources you recommend?
Yeah.
Whether that's books or podcasts of, like, things that have helped you.
Totally. Since I'm just a girl, you can find me on Instagram right now, simply Rheva, and that's actually where I put my 40 days of 40 situations, and I tend to dump my brain about life's lessons along the way. We will eventually compile those things into life, so you'll find out information about that there as well. And resources, honey. There's another podcast called In the Light, and it is by Dr. Anita Phillips. This woman is beyond brilliant, deals a lot with mental health, and trauma and navigating relationships and a lot of heart stuff. I've listened to tons of her podcasts, and you just feel like you just get born again all over again. So phenomenal, Dr. Nita Phillips. A Tale of Three Kings is a great book by Gene Edwards that deals with leadership, from literally dealing with Saul, David, and Absalom, and navigating how to deal with not so great leadership, and how, as a younger person, how to not overthrow the leadership that you're under simply because you disagree with it. So it's a book that I recommend. If you're in leadership, read that book for sure. Nona Jones has a book called Success from the Inside Out. She has a powerful testimony of how she overcame sexual abuse and trauma to be the person that she is today, who is like literally over faith-based partnerships for Facebook, and how she's navigated so many high corporate positions from where she began. So beautiful. And a new book that actually just came out that I actually haven't fully read, but I know the person and the story behind it, so I highly recommend it. It's called Woman Evolve, and it's by Sarah Jakes Roberts. She's Bishop T.D. Jakes' daughter. And her testimony within itself, being having a child at 13, and a not so great marriage to now this beautiful marriage and this ministry that she's been a part of, and she's just taking women. God's given her great revelation about Eve, and so she has this thing about rescuing Eve, has a passion about rescuing Eve.
I'm very
so it's just about woman evolving into who God created you to be and leaving all your fears behind. So I highly recommend it as well.
Ooh, that's a good list.
I'm like, I want to read
I literally have goosebumps. You're just talking about it. I have goosebumps.
Just from hearing about the book, I'm like, ooh. Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming today, for getting to know us a little bit and spending time with us. Like, seriously, such an honor. We just feel so honored anytime someone says yes. It's incredible, and I know that this has helped me. I know it will be a gem for many other people who listen. So we just really value your time and graciousness in coming on. Woman beings out there, you can find us at Woman Being Podcast on Instagram. We also have a website, womanbeingcommunity.com. Please subscribe, comment, leave a review. We love your questions and suggestions and all sorts of feedback that you've given us over time. And so please bring it on. We welcome it. And hope you have a great week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Just put on the line.